Hi, this is Debbie with a video tutorial for Splitcoaststampers. From this photo I'm going to use the small place setting card to show you how to use your dies to create interesting effects such as partial die cutting and also giving an impression that you can then go and watercolour. You do need some form of die cutter for this technique, but apart from that the supplies are quite minimal. I've got some Tim Holtz distress watercolour cardstock and also a die. In this case it's Simon Says Stamps Paulina butterfly die. And then for the watercolouring I've got some Hero Arts sprays that I'm going to use as my watercolouring medium. Tim's watercolour card comes already pre-cut to 4 1/4 by 5 1/2 and I've marked that at 2 3/4 and then using a ruler to draw a pencil line across. You need rather a large sized open die for this technique, and this is the Paulina butterfly die from Simon Says Stamp. And I'm placing the butterfly die so that the wing is above the pencil line, but the main part of the butterfly, the rest of the body and that, is below the line. I'm taking a little of the sticky off some washi tape to keep the die in place, and now what I need to do is I want to die cut the top wing and I want to impress the lower wing and the rest of the body. I use a Cuttlebug for die cutting, so I have a B plate and a C plate here, and I'm adhering the card to the B plate so that the pencil line is running along the edge of the plate, so that when it's sandwiched between the B and the C plate, only the butterfly wing up to the point of the pencil line, only the butterfly wing is between the plates, and only that piece will be die cut when it's ran through the die cutting machine. I'm going to take this off screen now and run it through my die cutting machine, and here you can see that, by the way, you need to keep your butterfly die in place on the card, but there you can see how the wing was partially die cut. Now with the butterfly die still in place, I'm now using one of those tan embossing mats and sandwiching that and the butterfly, but this time the main body and the lower wing, sandwiching it all between two B plates and then running it through my die cutter so that the die impresses into the cardstock. Now that my butterfly is partially die cut and impressed into the card, I can remove the pencil line and then carefully score along that line, but avoiding the butterfly wing, so that when the card is folded over and using a bone folder to make that fold nice and sharp, the butterfly wing sticks up. There's been a real watercolour trend going on recently, and so I thought I'd watercolour my butterfly, and I'm going to mix some Hero Art sprays with a little Perfect Pearls. By mixing the Perfect Pearls in with the sprays you get a real iridescent shine to the resulting watercolour. So along with the Perfect Pearls on my acrylic block, I'm also going to add a few drops of the Hero Arts Pool spray and a few drops of the purple, the Hero Arts Passion Flower spray as well. Out of the bottle the inks are very intense in colour, and so along with the Perfect Pearls I'm also using plenty of water to dilute the intensity of the colour down. The easiest way I found to watercolour is to actually let the water do the work for you, and so I've got a fine paintbrush and I'm going to paint a design onto the butterfly area with just water. I'm not using any of the inks at this point, I'm just painting some plain water onto the butterfly in the areas that I'm going to want the ink. I'm making sure I get the water all the way around to the edges, both on the die cut area and on the impressed area. I'm also making sure that I'm not painting the whole of the butterfly. I've left some areas without water, I've left some of them dry, and these will stay white when the ink is added. Now that I've painted my design in water, it's time to start adding the ink, and this really is, it's just like magic. You touch the ink to the water and it bleeds and spreads only where the water is. And you can just continue to keep adding little touches of the ink and letting it spread through the water, letting the water do the work. You want to add the colour where you want the colour to be darkest. So by touching it to the edges of the butterfly's wing there, that will stay the darker colour when everything blends out. Once I've added some of the pool colour to the water, I'm now going back in with a little bit of the passion flower and just adding a few touches to give variation. And the pool colour is still wet, and combining the two colours in this way, the passion flower blends into the pool colour and it gives a really nice effect. I'm now going to leave that top wing alone, and that's possibly one bit of advice I would give for watercolouring, is that not to overdo it, and that often once something dries, it actually dries and looks a lot prettier than sometimes it does when it's still wet. I'm now moving on to adding some water to the lower wing, and again just dropping in some of the ink and letting the ink blend and trail through the water. I'm going to leave things about there now, but if you happen to have gone outside the lines, what you can do is you can use a little bit of clear water and gently wet the area and then dab away the colour with a paper towel. You can either let the watercolour dry naturally, or you can speed up the process by hitting it with your heat tool. Once it's dry, it's time to add a name or a sentiment. You could use a stamp and stamp directly onto the card, or you can do as I did here, which is to trace, I traced my daughter's name onto a piece of vellum, and then I scribbled on the back of the vellum, so that putting down some graphite there, and then I can then write over the top of the lettering again onto the card, and this time the writing over the top of the lettering will push the graphite down onto the card and give you a faint outline. Adding the lettering in this way I think gives a much more natural look to go with the watercolouring. It's a much more of a handwritten look. You could use a fine paintbrush and write over the lettering. I'm actually going to use a calligraphy pen here, and I'm going to drop a little bit of the two colours into the back of the pen nib, and then as I write the two colours will blend and mix, and you'll get variation in the lettering as you write. I would certainly recommend a quick practice on some scrap paper before moving on to your project, as you don't want to get an ink splodge and ruin your piece of work. Slow and steady, I think, is a good rule of thumb with hand lettering. You can use this same technique to transfer stamped messages across to your card in a hand lettering style. By stamping a sentiment onto the vellum, you can then trace over it and then handwrite over that and give a much more natural handwritten look. That's actually what I did with a happy birthday sentiment on this matching card. On the card I also used some of the same techniques I had done with the place setting. I impressed the butterfly into a card panel and watercoloured, but I also added a die cut on top, which again I'd watercoloured. The final touch was to add some sequins and rhinestones, and also a little bit of loosely gathered silver thread underneath the sequin which goes onto the centre of the butterfly's body. I hope you enjoyed this tutorial. Thank you for watching.